Ms. Hassan has about 10 years of experience working in Islamic finance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this welcoming and for the warm welcoming from everyone. And before I start, I just wanted to thank CFC for the great opportunity that we have with them. We are really glad to work with such a big name in Morocco, and we are very keen of this report. I know it took a long time to be published. We were working until the last minute on this report, but we expect that it will create impact, that it will share information on Islamic finance and the potential for the growth of the industry in Africa, led by companies such as CFC and supported by Thomson Reuters to provide information about the market that will help us develop the industry even further. So just to start up about my presentation, and we can try to keep it a little bit attractive, that we will first give you a background about the report itself. So the report is a collaboration between Thomson Reuters and CFC to develop the potential of Islamic finance in Africa. And this report will give a comprehensive view where we will cover three main elements. First, the global market about Islamic finance, and then the regional one on Africa, and we will tap on 5 top countries in Africa within Islamic finance. And finally, we will give a little bit of, since we are in Morocco, to do a little bit coverage of how is Islamic finance developing in Morocco. So before I get into the global Islamic finance, and I got a request from CFC to keep this session interactive. So based on, and just to give you also a background, Thomson Reuters launched an indicator called Islamic Finance Development Indicator that assesses the development for the finance sector not only from the financials and asset side, but also from the perspective of the ecosystem. So how much do they have development in awareness and in governance and education? So here's my question, and let's see if everyone knows the answer. Who do you think is the top country on Islamic finance development?
Malaysia.
And as of your information?
It's Malaysia because of high of
Thank you. Actually, yes. The answer is right, so everyone did their homework, they read the report. So Islamic finance landscape, what we have done that we assess the growth of the industry for around 131 countries around the world. And this assessment is not only covering the assets, but we also covered how many news are there out in Islamic finance, how many institutions offer Islamic finance education, and how many governments offer the framework for Islamic finance. And among the top is Malaysia and Bahrain and UAE. Just to give you also a background about the report, what we do is we assess these countries also based on the size. So we adjust the results. We adjust the result based on the size of the country. So we count for the population and the GDP of the country. For example, if we have one bank in a small country like Bahrain, it doesn't serve the same amount for a bigger country like Morocco. So we need to adjust to the needs of the nations based on the population side and the GDP side of the country. So we're having, as you can see in the graph, the greener countries are the more presence of Islamic finance, and as lighter as it gets, we get less presence of Islamic finance. We have few countries growing very actively, so they might be not in the top 10, but they are growing heavily into Islamic finance, and we expect them within the next 5 years to actually compete with the bigger markets. So one of them is Morocco, actually. We have also Nigeria, we have Indonesia, and we have also Brunei and Maldives. They're all setting up agendas to develop Islamic finance industry. And it's not because of only the religion part, but it's also of its concept, how it supports sustainable and responsible finance, which will reflect on the growth of the Islamic economy in general, and not only the growth of the financial sector. Moving to see the whole ecosystem, as you can see, we have the financial markets, which is represented by around 2.2 trillion as of last year, and it represents by more than 1,400 financial institutions that covers Islamic finance, whether they are Islamic banks or windows, or whether they are takaful and other financial institutions as investments. On the other side, we have the governance aspect. We have more than 12 countries that have centralized Sharia boards within their country. We have more than 1,000 Sharia scholars around the world helping governing the Sharia aspect of the financial institutions. On the knowledge and awareness aspect, we have around 680 Islamic finance education providers where they provide courses and degrees on Islamic finance. And we have more than 2,500 Islamic finance research in the past 3 years, and more than 400 events gathering Islamic finance professionals, whether they are in seminars or in conferences. So we can see that the whole platform of Islamic finance is more than just the Islamic finance assets of Sukuk, but we have other aspects that needs to be assessed because they build the foundation for Islamic finance. Having the right human resources, having the right education system, having the right regulation framework, they all collaborate to develop the Islamic finance industry as a whole. So moving beyond the ecosystem and going to the landscape of Islamic finance, we see that out of the $2.2 trillion, we have 72% going for Islamic banking, gathering the Islamic fully fledged banks plus the Islamic windows, followed by the Sukuk as an industry that is growing further, especially many countries, even non-OIC, are entering the Islamic finance fixed income instrument. We have seen also growth in the funds area, the takaful area, and other financial institutions. But where we see more potential is actually in the SME framework and also in the digital and fintech area. We see a lot of companies, especially recently, they are all involved in the Islamic fintech perspective. So we are seeing more growth in this area where they will collaborate with the other segments, including Islamic banks and takaful. So if we put all of this in one perspective and we see the whole Islamic finance as a growing opportunity, we see that there is a 9% average growth across the next 5 years. So until 2022, we expect Islamic finance to reach $3.8 trillion. And this is only accounting for the existing market. So we've been very conservative about this prediction. But if things plays well for other countries that are entering Islamic finance, we expect that this might even grow even further. And we think countries like Morocco and Brunei and Maldives who just open their doors to grow into Islamic finance will add more growth potential for this growth of Islamic finance. So moving from the global aspect, let's look at Africa as a continent. So who do you think, another question to the audience, testing your knowledge, who do you think is the biggest Islamic finance country, from the Islamic finance perspective in Africa? So who are the most developed country and who's the one with the biggest amount of assets? Anyone?
Tunisia.
Just guess.
Nigeria?
Okay, so yes, South Africa is actually the biggest from Islamic finance assets perspective. They have around 2.6 billion, including their sukuk and banking. But as growth, as development, including other ecosystem, Tunisia actually one of the highest growth because of its small size compared to what they have from knowledge, education, research, and Islamic banking presence. So we expect that Africa can get more out of there because despite that, Africa has around 480 million population, which is around 20% of the Muslims around the world, and it's the second continent from its size. The Islamic finance asset is still 27.5 billion, which is compared to the assets and the potential and population, still have a lot of room for growth. And this was noticed by many African countries where they started developing the framework of Islamic finance. So we have around 8 countries by end of 2017 entering Islamic finance and developing legal and ruling frameworks to develop Islamic finance regulations. So if we start with each country, and we will cover 5 countries in brief. So we can see that Nigeria is one of the biggest countries that have Islamic finance, and it has a big population into big population into Muslims, where we can see that their first window started in 1992. So since 1992, the growth of Islamic finance have been tremendously happening in. So we can see that there is around $500 million in assets, where it is coming from 1 fledged Islamic finance and 1 takaful operators and 2 sukuk issuers. We expect that Nigeria can be further developed. There is lack of awareness in the market about the industry. So with establishing more awareness program in Nigeria, we expect it to grow more, especially that they have a centralized Sharia board, and this is one of the few African countries that they have centralized Sharia board. Moving to Kenya, which is the second biggest economy in terms of GDP, Kenya have around $400 million total assets, and they have 2 takaful institutions and 1 fully fledged banks and 2 windows. Kenya, they're looking to establish Nairobi as a center for their operation, and they look forward that they become one of the Islamic finance hubs by trying to fund their deficit and working on their infrastructure from that aspect. So they are thinking of raising of around $15 billion by 2023 in order to fund their deficits and infrastructure from Islamic finance assets. So Kenya is actually keen and interested to develop Islamic finance to support its infrastructure project, which is actually the case of many different African countries where they utilize Islamic finance to fund and diversify their investment. South Africa, so it's one of the biggest, as Manas said, and they have $2.6 billion, and they have actually the largest sukuk issuance in Africa. And they are also expected to issue another sukuk in 2018 because they want to utilize the sukuk to fund their deficit of $4 billion. And I think South Africa started very rapidly at the beginning. They kind of slowed down, but I think they're trying to pick up with issuing more sukuk issuance. Ivory Coast gives a very unique position. It's still a small country and it only has 40% Muslim there, but they have grown interest in Islamic finance and they are expecting to utilize it to fund their $7 billion deficit. And we saw that recently through their recent issuance into sukuk. And we expect that they want to lead on the debt market front and become leaders in that aspect in Islamic capital market. So this is a very brief summary about some of the key African countries. And I'll just give more thought into Morocco before we enter into the panel to just give us some background on what is happening and what is the recent development of Morocco. So to start up with, Morocco has been through a long journey on Islamic finance. And Morocco was one of the leaders in the African, maybe not the earliest, but it had the growth, sustainable growth on Islamic finance. So if I may ask, what year do you think is the first year? Actually, I shouldn't show you the graph. I hope you did not cheat it. So, when do you think Islamic finance was initiated? I want someone who did not look at this story. Is it in the 80s? Is it in the 90s? Is it in the early 2000s? When do you think we have started Islamic finance or participated finance in Morocco?
85.
You saw that?
No, I knew.
You know? Okay, excellent. Okay, so thank you. Actually, we have very knowledgeable audience, so maybe we don't need to do that much work in awareness of Islamic finance after all. So yes, there was first initiated by some international banks who wanted to actually develop Islamic finance in Morocco. They had requested a license for Bank in Maghreb, but it didn't go through. And then there was more development by 1996, where the Safa Bank issued the first Islamic fund. And then there was the development in 2015 of the first centralized Sharia board within Morocco. Finally, which is one key milestone that Morocco went in, is January 2017, as everyone knows, where Morocco started giving out license to banks to establish participative finance. So, yeah, thank God, I did not press. So, how many banks are actually been established or been granted license by the Moroccan banking license? 5? Only?
And 3 windows.
Fully fledged and Windows?
5 full-fledged and
Okay,
3.
so everyone is up with the news. Good. So yes, we have 5 Islamic finance or participative finance fully fledged, and we have 3 windows that are actually operating, and we are expecting to see their results by next year, hopefully. We are seeing, we paid a visit to some of these banks, and most of them, they're actually starting big. They're putting big investment, they're opening big branches, an average of 5 to 8 branches each. So we are expecting tremendous growth into Islamic finance in Morocco. And I'm actually expecting that it will be competing into the top 10 Islamic finance in the indicator because of the huge perspective that they have in Morocco. So just to put everything into perspective and to wrap our recommendation, what can be done to develop the industry? And this is not only from Morocco perspective, but also from regional and global aspects. So we, with CLC, we put in phases of 3 phases of development. First, where we start with the capacity of human capital, the knowledge aspect, and then with the market investment research. So what we are presenting here is that if you create the right market awareness, and I'm not speaking only awareness of individuals and retailers, but also awareness from corporate aspects about their opportunities in the participative finance, how you can collaborate with banks, and on the other hand, the supply side, where you have the banks having enough knowledge about the products they are offering, we can build a bridge where transaction and exchange of benefits can happen. And this is one of the key fundamental issues that we have, that sometimes the people who work in Islamic finance don't understand the concept of the industry, and on the other hand, the consumer who do Islamic finance, they don't understand. It's either people who say, we want Islamic finance products, or that will say, oh, Islamic finance is just a replication to the conventional, it's only repackaging, because they don't understand the real concept behind the products. The research can be a venue where you share depth into the market, not only shallow servicing the industry, but also looking into alternative solutions and other aspects that can grow the industry in more depth. Second phase, or maybe within the first phase, also standardization of Sharia and legal, and this is something we saw happening in Morocco. So we saw that there is a centralized Sharia board where everyone has the same product. Despite some of its disadvantages, it's actually creating more transparency to the market and building consumer confidence because they know what they are signing into. So all of this will be moved to professional connectivity, and that's why we are all here. We are connected through such events where we can share knowledge and share our experience, and eventually, hopefully, we build up deals that will generate benefit to the overall economy of Islamic finance. And by that, we can move to the last stage, which is actually creating innovation ways and social benefit to the market. So it's not only about creating financial aspect, but it's also how we utilize these finances to build an actual development to the industry. And we saw that in different countries where they use microfinance and SME to do that through Islamic finance to actually do agriculture and manufacturing growth, and that helps build the nation and the GDP of the country itself. So, as a key takeaway, and a final take on that, we saw the development globally of Islamic finance and how Africa has 25% of the Muslims and how they can grow. We saw the models of different African countries, and then finally we saw Morocco can be a potential leader in that aspect. And to just conclude and to close my presentation is that having entities like CFCs or countries like Morocco that are spotted between Europe and Africa and the Middle East. So you have an Arabic nation that is speaking French, which can give you a gateway to the French nation to grow into the participative finance, which creates a potential and high opportunity for the industry to connect with different language speakings or different backgrounds. And we see that, inshallah, with more development and more support of the government and entities like CFC and other participative banks, this can happen and be translated into the good of the overall economy. So this is the end of my presentation. You can view our reports in this link, and we will definitely take it forward now in the panel. So thank you very much, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are questions, for sure, but we'll keep them until the end. So keep your questions, and we'll take them at the end. Thank you very much. That was very insightful. And you used some keywords like connectivity. This is what these events are about, connecting people. So we're very happy about that. Now, without further delay, I'll pass the microphone to Manal Benoussi, who's the Director of Strategy and Marketing at CSC.